Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name's John. I'm here to talk about how we got here. Hello. Let's get started. How did we get here, right? So I've been to so many of these talks, and I hear amazing stuff. I see awesome exploits. I see things that people are doing that are amazing, cutting-edge stuff. Techniques, processes, things they've done, things they found, right? But what I'm seeing more and more, and especially as more younger people are coming into the industry, is kind of, how did we get here? Where are we right now in the history of cybersecurity, InfoSec, and all that good stuff, right? Because cybersecurity is not just an normal IT field, right? Because we work with people. Not just computers. We work with computers and people. And how do they work together? And how do people work with people? And how do computers work with computers? And servers work with people, and et cetera, right? So cyber isn't just about machines and code and, finding the exploit. It's also about people. So let's defrag all of this stuff and see where we go. We're going to do a journey through all the way back to the beginning when we called things cybernetics in the early days of what cyber was, right? So hopefully that gives us a good perspective on, what we're doing now and why we're doing it. So a little bit about me. I am from the U.S., but I currently live in Poland now. We talk about generations a lot in the U.S. There's the Gen X, the millennials, all this stuff. There was a cool article I read one time about this little niche kind of micro generation in between Gen X and the millennials called the Oregon Trail generation. That's where I find myself in. So I don't know how many people played Oregon Trail. Okay, a couple. But this was one of these early games. It was really hard to beat. I don't know if anybody ever beat it, actually. I occasionally will go punting. I know that's something that most Americans don't know what that is, but, I've been to Oxford and like to go down the, Thames and all that. So, and I do some Stonehenge art kind of stuff. I'm actually an artist. It's kind of weird because, I work in security, but I had a start in art and education and things like that. So, with technology, I was a late bloomer. I had a habit of taking everything apart that my parents gave me and breaking them. So they just didn't buy computers. They said, no, you're just going to break it. So I was that kid that went over to the other kid's house that had the computer, and then I broke his computer. So, I have a special ability to break things. I was an early street artist in the 90s. Before everybody knew who Banksy was, I was doing that kind of stuff. I was a little bit of a graffiti artist. I was known to sometimes dress up into things like utility workers and locksmiths and government type stuff, just to kind of test and see what society was going to measure and how I could, push those kind of boundaries, right? So an engineer and artist, I had to make a decision when I was in college, and I said, I don't want to make the decision. I want to be both, right? So I guess I'm somewhere in the middle of that, which is kind of fun place to be because, again, security is about people and machines. So I think it's important to kind of look at that from that perspective. I love information. I like to be plugged in as much as I can and learn as much as I can. So let's talk about information, because if we're going to talk about cyber roots and the history of how we got here, we have to understand how we got here from the perspective of information, right? A lot of people have told me that we're in the information revolution right now. We're leaving the industrial revolution. We had an agricultural revolution. We've had all these revolutions and changes. Right now, we're in the information one, right? So obviously there's a lot of different inventions and things that are not mentioned on this slide, but it gives you the idea of where we're going. But what does that mean? How did we get to an information revolution? So I want to look first at Alvin Toffler, a great writer from back in the day. He was talking about things that were way ahead of its time, right? So, he said, when we're talking about information and how we disseminate that information and teach, that, we're kind of in a transition phase. And it's really, really interesting that he said that 40 or 50 years ago, because he said that before we learned things in the early days of education from the churches. And that's really where people got a lot of their information from. But the Industrial Revolution changed that. People couldn't just look to the past to understand where they fit into the industrial world, right? So what they did is we somehow created an education system that kind of mimicked what the industrial factories were, right? Students came in, they were kind of separated into groups, they had different subjects in different areas. Everything got segmented. It was loud. They had an authoritative figure, right? So they were able to kind of condition people to go into the factory and work, right? But Alvin Toffler said, hey, that's not where we're going to be, when we look at the information age, where we're going in the future. Ironically enough, 50 years ago, he talked about that we would be in the future working from home. And it wouldn't be about the factory anymore. It would be about us exploring not how to, produce things, but how to understand things. Information and where we're going in this age is all about understanding and learning. And he saw that a long time ago. So, quote from him, right? The systems of tomorrow, fast and fluid. These machines will deal with the flow of the information or a flow of physical materials, while we deal with the flow of information and the insight. So both us and the machines, instead of being concentrated in these factories, will be scattered across, linked together. So cool that this guy was saying this so long ago, and here we are. So again, I want us to look at the past and understand how we got here, so that we can have a different perspective. Hey. Okay, the lightning workshops are starting if anybody signed up.
Thank you.
Cool. No worries. So let's keep moving through history. Information, right? The result of processing that which can be sensed, or the abstractions of the result. That's kind of my own definition of information, going through a lot of different information theories. But that's important, because when we start talking about machines, this is where a lot of the science behind what we do in cyber comes from, right? It's just simply, a little delay on my remote there. It's simply measuring things, right? So we can look at things in intervals or a segment of time, and that's where most of our machines and devices are working, right? Even bits themselves, right? The on and off of electricity. So we often think in this industry, information is just limited to data, messaging networks, things like that. But information isn't just encoded in the things that we make in our languages and the transmissions we send, the emails we send. We could look at information expressions in a lot of different ways. Maybe humans are, and DNA, maybe even that's an example of an expression of information. So as we're going through studying information, again, I was talking about the measurable value changes over time, right? That's where most of our information tech comes from. So we're measuring change or entropy, right? Or dysentropy. We're measuring at intervals. So that's pretty important. When we talk about cybernetics, which was the earliest field that dabbled with what cyber is, Norbert Wiener here, one and all, time and the apparatus to deal with them, whether in computing laboratory or in a circuit, have to deal with these recording, preservation, transmission, and use of the information. So what is it and how is it measured, right? So he wanted to answer those questions. A lot of the things that we were looking at in early information theory and early cybernetics got us where we are. But we had to kind of look at it in systems and break things down into parts, right? We've got a message source. It's encoded through some type of language, right? Then we have the channel with the noise. The noise is the entropy. That is the information being lost. And that's almost inevitable, it seems like, right? So we live in a world of systems, all these different things. And if we're thinking about it from a cybernetic standpoint, each of these systems will have some type of control mechanism or feedback mechanism, right? So let's expand our ideas of what a system is. I always like to look at this picture because this is our solar system, but what it would look like as it travels through the galaxy, right? So perception of a system is limited by whatever you limit it to, right? Everything seems stationary here while we're standing here. Everything's still, but we're moving really, really fast. And then when we take that perspective out a little bit further, we're moving even faster. So we have opposition to order, which is entropy. Disentropy, the opposite of that, right? Why is it that in the universe, entropy seems to be this thing that is constantly, moving through time? Maybe it's even one of the forces of time even, right? But yet we as people, we have a homeostasis, we have an order, and we tend to want to create those systems of security and control that we experience ourselves in our body, right? And we apply that to the world around us as it's, chaotic and more every day, right? So entropy is huge for information theory and security, right? So the first time we used entropy in relationship to, that I found, actual transmissions of messages was from the Bell Labs, where they were trying to describe how they just always seem to lose a little bit of information, through the transmissions that they were experimenting with. So there's a little bit of math for those mathematicians here, but the amount of information gained about a random variable signal from observing another random variable. So this is disentropy, right? So this is kind of important for life, information gaining, right? Ultimately, as a species, this is kind of what we're doing over time. Every generation, we gain more information and have a bigger understanding, maybe, right? The organism, us ourselves, is a system, right? And, when we're talking about systems, each cell in our body is an organism. We can look at it in a lot of different ways. Different communities working together. So you are essentially a community. So when we apply community, to society and we try to build that, we're just mimicking what our bodies are already doing. Disentropy. So maybe the organization is actually the core fundamental part of what messages are. I have a little bit of just thought pictures here just to talk about a little bit different ways, right? We have kind of fallen into a trap through our Freudian overlords that have turned everything into a want or a desire or a need, right? We live in a world with consuming is a big part of it in our Western culture, right? But not every form of, looking at the human mind and the relationship of people looked at that. Just thought really talks about, more of a psychology that's based on you're a whole system made up of smaller systems. So they're not acting independently. They're acting in unison, right? Which is, again, another important thing to think about when we look at our own systems and what we're trying to secure. We have a lot of different machines, different servers, different programs that are running different services. They all could seem very isolated, but they're all connected. So essentially that's what we're really looking at when we secure something, is the entire homeostasis of the entire system of all the systems, right, that we're working with. So let's get to the cyber stuff. Cyber stuff is definitely about guns and weapons and like cool stuff, right? This is, growing up in the 80s, I got to see a lot of cyber movies and they influenced me. But what is it really about? So I've got a handful of quotes up here. The art of governing, or science of government. I never thought of that until I started researching early on. I was like, cyber. I always thought cyber was about computers and code, but it's actually about governing and steering and how we move through something that has a control mechanism. That's kind of different. So study of systems, right? We were talking about systems, how they can receive, store, and process the information and use it for control. Securing efficient operation, right? The art of effective organization. The science and art of understanding. Cyber, the root of that comes from, I believe, a Greek word, and it was the steersman. So if you work in cybersecurity, what are you steering? What are you governing? What are you in charge to secure? Some type of control mechanism, some type of feedback loop? What is it that we're doing? Here's the basic cybernetic loop. So this is the beginning of machines right here. So this is from way back in the day. Norbert Wiener, again, had put this together. I believe it was like the 40s, 50s, something like that. But, all of our machines and computers and servers and all the technology that we're working with, this is essentially what it's doing, right? There's some type of controller. There's an action, an output, right? That output will hit another system. There's a feedback loop that comes in. We have our sensor, right? We can look at, and the thing that I want to bring up here that's important is that, again, we tend to focus on computers and technology too much in this industry. But the early cybernetic folks that were, experimenting and theorizing about this, they didn't see a difference between humans and machines. They saw it as the same thing. Right? So the way that people interpret and take input and process and output some type of reaction, machines were modeled after us, right? People as processors. So here's an interesting diagram that Norbert put together from the Cybernetics or Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine, 1948. So he talks about computing machines, and he's doing a comparison of how our nervous system works with actual, and how we're building and developing machines to kind of mimic that, right? So there was something called an effective tone, a conditioned reflex, right? So as we're going in through different processes and we're looking at a larger system that has smaller systems in it, we have multiple systems that are effectively, each have their own, effective tone, some type of reflex that they're working with. But then he talks about this effective tone totalizer. And, when I read this book, 25 years ago, I kind of just glazed over this part. But when I was going back through it, I said, wait a minute, what is this effective tone totalizer, right? It must adjust slightly based to provide stability for the whole machine, for the whole system, right? So what can we compare this to, right? Again, if we're securing a system, or we're securing a company, or we're securing a nation or a family, what is the effective tone totalizer? That is the ultimate, the steer. How are we steering the whole ship, right? That's really what cyber is that piece there. So we need to create things that can feel and tell when things are slightly off, and when we see things that are wrong, then we have to respond to them and fix them and secure them. So here's a cybernetics flow here. Again, cybernetics is human machines are kind of doing the same thing. There's a control mechanism, computer. our communication. So again, the computer or the phone or whatever device that you're using, that's essentially your effective tone mechanism. Cyberspace in itself is this giant black hole of all of these things together. But what's interesting to me is if we kind of go backwards and pull away from the fact that it's computers and tech, well, there's a lot of people in cyberspace, humans, right? Communicating with each other. So it's almost a reflection of the entire society of the world, the internet is, right? All of these different ideas and places. So if that's the effective tone totalizer, if we think of it that way, then we need to learn how to measure what's going on in the internet, in the cyberspace, right? We need to understand where are we as a species going if we continue this path and that we're heading to through how we're building our reality, right? So cybernetics, Norbert talked a lot about law, right? The law may be defined as ethical control applied to communication and to language as a form of communication, especially if it's under the control of some authority, right? Strong enough to give it a decision or an effective, social sanction. So, right. So again, early cybernetics, early cyber was thinking about people as a whole, society, humans, right? Understanding that law really is a mechanism that we put together to help control the flow of communication, how we live together and work together. But unfortunately, a lot of folks are out there. They can see that, and they understand a lot of these control mechanisms, feedback loops, and I don't know. There's a lot of noise right now for me and a lot of the people I talk to. There's so much information out there that people are starting to be kind of lost. Why are we doing what we're doing? I have so many things that I could do at one time. Which one do I do? I see a lot of people becoming kind of down about it even. They don't know what they're doing anymore and why. We're losing purpose, maybe. So let's go back and explore some early art movements that kind of lead us to where we got here in the cybersecurity age, right? So in the last century, almost 80 years ago or so, in France, a group of artists, writers, engineers, scientists, they got together and they decided that there's something going on with corporate culture where we're essentially bringing, giving people a commodity and getting people to want things that, is life about wanting and just, I need this, I need that. So they said, hey, we're losing connection. The way that this is going, it's going to segment us and it's going to turn people into somewhat of zombies almost, right? So some of the earliest hacking that I've seen in terms of social engineering, type of hacking is, these folks were doing really cool stuff where they were modifying existing billboards and modifying, messages that were being put out through corporations to try to say, hey, like in the end of the day, we're in control of where our species is going, not this massive controller, big corporation. So the letterist movement turned into the situationists. So again, these folks were really interested in social engineering. One of the early events where the people learned who the situationists were, they were also out of France, but they were from all over Europe. They crashed a premiere for a Charlie Chaplin film and kind of turned it into their own film almost by how they went in and changed how people saw the film by the art and the performance that they did in front of the show. So the situationists were looking for a unitary urbanism, right? The complex ongoing activity which consciously recreates humans' environment according to the most advanced conceptions, right? So how do we manipulate all of these things out there to help steer the ship, right? They talked about the tournament. It's a fluid language of anti-ideology. It occurs within a type of communication aware of its inability to enshrine any inherent and definitive certain. So this was a quote from Guy Debord. Guy was one of the main situationists. Guy was upset with the way that we were going. He kind of was against a lot of the consumer, Western direction that we were heading, and he thought that it was going to segment us and turn us into zombies, like I said before, right? So he started the group, and he wrote some really good stuff, one of which was the Society of the Spectacle, right? So a great quote from him: "The spectacle is a permanent opium war waged to make it impossible to distinguish goods from commodities, or true satisfaction from a survival that increases according to its own logic," right? Consumable survival must increase, in fact, because it continues to enshrine deprivation. Guy Debord. The world of images. History will see advertising as one of the real evil things of our time. It is stimulating people constantly to want, and want. Art reflects life. So, taking all this information in the early 2000s, I had teamed up with this artist from Washington State that was living in D.C. at the time. And this was before a lot of people knew what disinformation was. So we wanted to share with everybody what we thought was going the direction that we were going, right? So we created the U.S. Department of Art and Technology. And on the right, we have the secretary being sworn in by Alice Denning, who was at the time the wife of the head of the CIA in the U.S. We put out a website for the U.S. Department of Art and Technology. It wasn't a .gov, it was a .us. But, in the early 2000s, people didn't know what these things even meant, most of the people, right? So we went around and did political speeches in D.C. And as members of the U.S. Department of Art and Technology. And people didn't know that it wasn't real. They thought it was real. And it went on like this for a while. What is steering the ship, governing, right? So isn't that what we do in cyber? Is we look for ways to guide people. We didn't want to confuse people, though. We wanted to teach people about disinformation. So when they came to our shows and exhibits, we would end by, revealing everything and saying what it is. So governing, the temptation of being a controller, right? Societal engineering. So much fake news out there. Every day, more and more. I don't know about you all, but I'm kind of having a hard time finding actual good news anymore. What happens when we lose the truth from our media? Well, we can take one nation state that has probably taken this idea the furthest, right? So this is an aerial shot of Chernobyl during the Ukraine invasion, Russia invasion of Ukraine, right? So Russia, as we know, they are very good at rewriting history. So their soldiers, they don't teach about Chernobyl in Russia. So their soldiers didn't know what it was. So they dug trenches there, and then they got sick. So the Hacker Manifesto. When information becomes a commodity, it means we will only be able to see the information produced by that vectoral class. That's the class of the big super Uber corps and the massive ISPs and these big companies that are controlling everything, right? So the hack was something to counter that. The manifesto was written in the same structure that Guy Debord wrote Society of the Spectacle. So where are we now? We're separated. We're more divided than ever. Disinformation is pushing more segmentation. So how do we society control and regulate? We got to go back to the roots. We got to understand how we sculpt this tree so we can steer the ship. So what can you do? Be authentic. You have power in your positions in security. You are exposed to a lot of things. Be authentic. If something doesn't feel right, don't do it. Have integrity. Be cool. You have power in the positions that you have. You impact people. People put their trust in you to protect their systems. Have confidence. Speak out. Teach people. Help people learn about what it is that we're doing here so that we can help all of us, get through this and keep moving forward in a good direction. So that's all I got. Thank you.